we are running this series for the last 6 years, and it has been a great resource for the community from Fort Bend Master Gardeners. These classes aim at like empowering the homeowner to take charge of their backyard landscape, to learn most of the basics of how you can garden here in this area. And each class will go in depth into one aspect of the most fundamental aspects of the gardening. So we are recording these classes, and everybody who has registered for the class will get the recording. So that's the best part of it. So you can watch it any number of times. And we are starting this season with the basics of landscape success, how to be successful with your own gardens. If Peggy, if you can switch to the next slide. Yeah, so these are the classes that will be coming up this year. We have 6 classes lined up, and you can take a picture of this, and you can register for each class way ahead of time so that you will not miss it. And if you miss it, you will have the recording to watch. And this year we have a new topic, which is shade gardening in June, because a lot of us have oak trees in the front, and we have questions about what to do under them. So that is a new topic. But the other ones are something that we all need for the various aspects of our gardening. So I will sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Suma Mudan. I have been a master gardener from Fort Bend County for the last 10 years. And I'm very, very happy to be part of this great initiative. So I will turn over the program now to Rochelle, who is going to spearhead this program. And she will introduce the speaker, and then you will get to hear to Peggy DeHemacourt, who is the speaker, and you will have so much wealth of knowledge, and you will be so equipped to handle your gardens. Thank you so much for coming. See you in the next class. Rochelle?
So our speaker today is Peggy DeHemacourt, and Peggy joined the Fort Bend Master Gardeners in 2003 following retirement from her career in human resources management. She was certified as advanced trained in earth-kind landscaping in 2015 and enjoys sharing her knowledge with others. She lives in the Richmond area, where she and her husband employ many earth-kind landscaping practices and enjoy attracting birds and pollinators to their property, which contains many native plant species. She's the president of the Fort Bend County Agricultural and Horticultural Advisory Committee. She has served as president of the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners in 2016 and 2017, and has held various other Fort Bend Master Gardener board positions over the years. She helped form the Coastal Prairie chapter of the Texas Master Naturalists in 2004 and was in the first class. While working in the oil and gas industry, she served as president of HR Houston in 2001 and 2002. Peggy is a graduate of the University of Houston, with a bachelor's degree in business. And you will love Peggy. She is a wealth of knowledge. And I will turn it over to you, Peggy.
Thank you, Rochelle. Is my video coming in clearly to you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for that good introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this this Zoom class today. I always enjoy talking about this topic, and I hope you'll come away with some things that are a little bit thought-provoking and some good tips that you can employ in your own landscapes. Today, I want to be providing you with practical tips on how to create an attractive and a sustainable landscape. Beauty and sustainability, that's the goal. I'm going to start with an introduction to earth-kind landscaping, and from there, I'll go into some of the basics of landscape planning, and we'll finish up with the principles of landscape design. So let's begin getting on the same page about what we mean by landscape. Your landscape is what you and others see around your home and your house and your other buildings. It's not just about your flowering plants. It includes your lawn, your trees, your planting beds, hardscapes like patios. It's about the entirety of your space. And just like a home, you can think of it as having ceilings, which would be trees and arbors. It has walls, perhaps, which would be shrubs and vines. And it has a floor, which might be lawns or ground covers and hardscapes or some combination of the two. Well-designed landscapes have real value. Uh, they enhance the beauty and the value of our homes. They give us a nice place to get outdoors and relax and perhaps play with the pets or the kids and enjoy what little bit of nature we can bring into our own yards. And if they're well designed, we believe that they should be low maintenance and sustainable. Um, Most of us want a beautifully landscaped yard. We want lots of curb appeal. We want to be able to enjoy it, but we don't want to spend all of our time and spare money maintaining it. So, low maintenance and sustainability, as well as beauty, are the goals. So, what do we mean by sustainable? Well, if we select plants that can tolerate the highs and the lows of our temperature ranges, they can tolerate periods of droughts and excessive rainfall. We all know how we have one or the other as a rule. And if the plants that we select are compatible with our native soils, then they should be able to thrive without our need to add too much more in the way of inputs. And inputs are described as things like fertilizers, pesticides, water, and even our time. So low maintenance and sustainability can be achieved by adopting Earthkind landscaping principles. Earthkind is a landscape management system. It was created by horticultural specialists and agents and volunteers of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service with help from industry representatives. It's said to be the fastest growing program of its kind in the nation. And as you can see from this slide, Earthkind is federally registered as a trademark of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. And that's done to protect its educational focus, its use, and its integrity. You can trust Earthkind landscaping because it's based on research-proven techniques. It helps us create a horticultural system on our properties that's based on real-world effectiveness and environmental responsibility. So it does that by combining the best of organic as well as traditional principles. Notice the words that I put in italics, especially real world effectiveness. I want you to think about what that means. For me, it means the processes that occur in nature without human action. Of course, we know that in nature, plants grow where they're well adapted. They take their nourishment from the soil, and that soil is continually replenished by the decomposition of organic material like fallen leaves and branches and even trees. And that decomposition process returns nutrients to the soil, maintaining its fertility, so that in nature, plants can perform without human intervention. And they coexist with other living organisms in often mutually beneficial relationships. Now, having said all that, I guess that most of our homes don't exist in the real world as I've just described it. We probably live in areas that have been disturbed by development. So what Earthkind landscaping does is teaches us how to imitate these real world natural processes on our landscapes, which in turn benefits the environment. So today I'm going to introduce you to many topics. We don't have adequate time to take deep dives into all of them. As Suma mentioned, there are upcoming classes that will take deep dives into certain of them. So as we go along, I'm going to give you references to websites, and I hope that when this is over, if I piqued your interest, that you'll visit these websites to learn more. The first one is aggihorticulture.tamu.edu. That is a treasure trove of practical advice for home gardeners. It's built for us. You'll find all the information you can use to help maintain your landscapes. And as you can see, it has a page for earthkind where you'll learn more about earthkind landscaping. So make note of that. And let's keep talking about this real world, which I love. This is what I think the real world can teach us. A plant's going to reach its potential if it's in its right place. That means it's getting the right amount of sunlight. It's on the right soil, the soil that it's adapted for. It's getting the right amount of rainfall, and it has enough space to grow to maturity. The real world can also teach us that organically enriched soils sustain plant life. Nobody's in a natural space like you see in this picture with a sack of fertilizer making this happen. It's happening. And the real world can teach us that balanced ecosystems are healthy. I'd like you to think of your yard as an ecosystem. What does that mean? Well, an ecosystem is all the living and non-living things in any environment. So as gardeners, our challenge is to take these real world lessons to heart and work with nature in our landscapes instead of working against it. And the gardening, practicing gardening techniques that are based on earthkind landscaping helps us accomplish that. So here's the overview of earthkind landscaping. It encourages water conservation and quality. That's important. I probably don't have to tell you that. Our water supply in Texas is under pressure due to growing populations and our seasonal fluctuations in rainfall and periodic droughts. I just read in the Chronicle this week that according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Texas population grew by nearly 500,000 people in 2023. Which is the largest numeric change of any state in the nation. An estimated 30.5 million now call Texas home, and we all want water. Earthkind landscaping encourages landscaping for energy conservation. How we landscape can significantly change the microclimate around a home. It can make it more efficient and reduce our energy costs. If we properly place trees, shrubs, vines, we can keep our homes warmer in winter and cooler in the summer. Earthkind landscaping encourages a reduction in fertilizer and pesticide use. That's because they can harm the environment when they flow off of our property and pollute water sources like streams, rivers, lakes, and ultimately the ocean. And overuse of pesticides can upset that ecological balance in our landscapes. And earthkind landscaping encourages a reduction of yard waste entering landfills. Every year, millions of tons of leaves, weeds, grass clippings, tree limbs, and other organic debris, yard waste, ends up in our landfills. So earthkind landscaping teaches us that we can be a part of the solution instead of being part of the problem where these important issues are concerned. Let's look at that a little bit more closely, starting with water, and think about the role that we play. I'd say most of us take water for granted, right? We turn on the tap and we expect it to be there. What we don't often think about is that lots of people are working behind the scenes to manage our reservoirs and rivers, ensuring that competing interests are being met, that there's enough water for the farmers, for recreation, for healthy aquatic systems, and for municipal water districts for purification before that water reaches our homes. Water conservation is a really big part of earth-kind landscaping. It is said that as much as 30% of our municipal water supplies is used in our landscape, and that can increase to as much as 60% in the summertime. And similarly, the EPA has published this information that across the nation, every day, 9 billion gallons of water is used for landscaping. And they estimate that as much as 50% of that is wasted. Wasted, we'll talk more about that in a bit, but how is water wasted? Well, it's wasted when it doesn't soak into the soil, but rather runs down our driveways, or it's wasted if it's sprayed into the air on a hot day or a windy day and evaporates, or it's wasted if we're just using too much of it. When irrigation water leaves our landscapes, it leaves like storm water, and it takes any pollutants that exist with it. Some of this we don't have much control over, like vehicular pollution or just sediments and other debris. But we do have control over how heavily we use fertilizers and insecticides and herbicides. So I want that, we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Or right now, let's talk about improper use of fertilizers and chemicals. You know, in our quest for a beautiful landscape, it's tempting to reach for the many inexpensive and readily available, wonderful products that are on the market that promote growth in plants and control pests. We see a problem, we want to buy a solution, but we need to take care because products can move from the application site to the surrounding area. They can evaporate into the atmosphere, they can leach into groundwater, and they can run off to surface water. And especially the nitrates and phosphates that are found in fertilizer can become very problematic when they end up in water sources. And the end result of that can be fish kills, for example. So what can we do to mitigate that problem? Well, one thing we can do where fertilizers are concerned is fertilize based on soil tests. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but notice the website, soiltesting.tamu.edu. This is easy, it's kind of fun, and it's inexpensive. We can also practice into what's called integrated pest management. The picture on the right of this slide is a pyramid. And you'll notice at the very top of the pyramid, it says chemical control. Integrated pest management teaches us that there are a lot of things we can do to minimize or control pests in our landscape before we reach for the chemicals. So again, that's something else. Can't take a deep dive into it today, but you certainly can, and there's easy to understand information at ipm.tamu.edu. The message here is that we should be using chemicals as a last resort and only applying fertilizers when we know exactly what nutrients our soil needs. Okay, and what role do we play in landscape waste accumulation? Well, that's kind of pretty obvious to us on garbage day most of the time, right? Our yard waste account for about 20% of landfill volume, and that costs us a lot of money. The other part of this problem is think about the fact that no one's going to want the next landfill built in their backyard when we fill up the ones that we have today. So we can do things with some of our yard waste to put it to productive use. We can compost our leaves and our grass clippings. We can even not pick up our grass clippings. We can leave them on the lawn where they have a beneficial effect of returning some of their nutrients to the soil over time. We can even chip or shred our leaves and woody cuttings and use them for mulch. In other words, there are ways to convert yard waste to beneficial use. And that's how nature does it. That's how nature recycles organic waste, which results in soil fertility and plant health. When we use compost in our gardens, we reduce our need for fertilizers because compost is the best slow release fertilizer there is. And it also improves our soils and it increases our plant health. So a lot of us are putting a lot of valuable stuff on the curb come garbage day after we maintain our lawns. So again, these are things that we're doing just out of habit, that we can pause and perhaps think about doing differently. So this next slide shows you the 7 earth kind landscaping principles. You're going to find all the information you want on these at Aggie Horticulture's website. I'm going to switch gears in a minute, though, and start talking about the first one, which is planning and design. I'm not going to go into depth on any of the other ones, but we'll have classes that will be talking about those too. Before I talk about planning and design, are there any questions perhaps in the chat about what I've covered so far that I should address, Rochelle?
We do not have any questions yet.
Okay, that's good. Well, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have questions, don't be shy about putting them in the chat. Okay, let's talk about landscape planning. So what's that mean? For me, it means beginning with the end in mind. So I'm going to share my failure story with you. I'd like to say I was sharing a success story, but I'm going to share my failure story with you to make a point. Don and I bought a home. We built a home on 2 bare acres in 1992. Now, you wouldn't build a house without a set of plans, right? But all too often we make planting decisions without planning first. Here we were, we had a new house, we had a bare yard, we had no plan. We were both working full-time jobs, commuting from Richmond to the city of Houston 5 days a week. Weekends were crazy busy with chores, and we wanted to start landscaping. And the easiest thing we could do would be to go out on a Saturday and buy a little live oak tree that we could plant in the backyard, right off the patio. It made sense at the time. That was 1992. 6 years later, we have a plan. We decided to hire a landscape professional to come to our home and help us plan some planting beds, both in the backyard and the front yard. And we set some goals working with this landscaper. We wanted to take this big, expansive backyard and create a more intimate space. Think of it as an outdoor room. When that picture I showed you before was taken, I was standing right here. This is the back of the house, and the patio's right in here. So the idea was we would enclose some of this space, so to speak, with island planting beds to create the effect of an outdoor room and make it more intimate. And so I wanted to grow some things that we could bring into the kitchen. I wanted an edible garden. I wanted to grow some native plants that would attract birds and butterflies. I thought I wanted some roses at the time, so we had a little rose garden built in. And of course, the plan design included a focal point back here. This was a pergola with a swing on it, and that was visible from, there's windows all across the back of the house. So this sort of brought the outdoors in, just what I had in mind. So excited. And all this was full sun at the time. So everything I wanted could be achieved in a full sun environment. But I want you to notice the blue line, the existing live oak. Don't recall any mention of that oak when we were planning this renovation, so to speak. I don't remember even thinking about whether it belonged there or if maybe we could still relocate it without losing it. It was still pretty young. So there it was. We just left it. And we got these gardens, beds established and planted, and life was good. I was happy. But 31 years later, look what happens. I took this picture, a month or 6 weeks ago. The gardens aren't their most photogenic right now, but you'll get the picture. Here's the island bed with the swing. It's now a bench and not a swing anymore. The other island bed is over here. We put in a water garden here. We redid the patio. But here's this danged oak tree. I mean, it dominates the outdoor room. Would you ever put a tree in the middle of a room? The middle of this room should have been a beautiful carpet of turf grass. So now my plant selection is affected by shade. I had to move the edible garden to a sunnier spot. And notice what else I've done. I came in and planted more trees. There's one there on the outside of the room. There's another there, which is okay. I think if this big old oak tree weren't in the center, I'd still have enough sunlight to achieve some of my original gardening objectives. But, you just adapt. And you heard in my introduction that we like to attract birds to the yard. And so the silver lining in this cloud is that this big old behemoth oak tree does just that. It's the species Quercus, the live oak, the plant genus Quercus. Live oak is a member of that genus. It supports a lot of moths, butterflies, and insects that use the oak tree, for their life cycle, which makes them a great place for birds to find food. So we're attracting birds to the yard, all right, but with a giant oak tree that probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. So one of the lessons to be gained by you today is that when you're planning, always select plant materials with their mature height and breadth in mind. Live oaks are beautiful, and this one would be gorgeous even elsewhere on my property, but I have it where I have it, and I can't do anything about it now or don't want to. So that's my story. I hope I made a point with it. Achieving a well-designed landscape involves creating a plan, selecting plants for all seasons because you're going to want to feel good about what you're seeing winter, summer, spring, and fall. Excuse me. And achieving some appropriate maintenance goals. Sorry. So more than just planting trees and shrubs, landscape design is a bit of an art form. We need to plan for complete development, allowing time and space for future changes. We need to make sure that everything we do is part of our grand plan, and we can change our grand plan as we go along. But we need to allow ourselves permission to implement it over a few years. So these are the factors that influence landscape design. Budget, that means everything. You might have to excavate. You might need building permits. You might have to hire subcontractors. You might have to remove and dispose of surface materials. You might have to truck in soil and soil amendments. You might have to buy and install hardscapes like patios, plants, sod, structures. You want to consider your neighborhood sights and sounds. Do you want to see the neighbor's yard, or do you want to block the neighbor's yard from your view? You might even consider site characteristics. This would be a little more challenging in a typical suburban neighborhood, but if you had some property, this could come into play. What that means is that you preserve the best of the natural resources that you might have on your property. Some lucky folks might buy property that have ponds or streams, or maybe you've got some really good turf, mature trees, some rock outcroppings, depending on where you are in Texas, that sort of thing. But on a small lot in a typical suburban neighborhood, this might not enter into your landscape design process. And if I remember later on, I'll share a story with you where about site characteristics that I observed on one of my vacations recently. But I digress. And we want to take into account climate. What's climate? We all know it's our cold and our heat, and you might think of our sunlight and our wind and our precipitation. And this diagram kind of illustrates the kinds of things you would think about when you start planning. The direction of winter winds, maybe you want a barrier to block winds. The view of the neighbor's property. Yes, you sort of have to start thinking about your space in these kinds of terms. Earthkind landscaping tells us that we need to pay attention to the physical and environmental elements of design. Take shade or the lack of shade. It's a deciding factor in our plant selection. Your soil conditions. Soil is so important. It performs a whole lot of functions. It anchors plants, it stores water, air, and nutrients, and it provides an important environment for microorganisms to live. And those microorganisms some of them interact with the plant's roots for the health of the plant. The chemical and physical properties of soil greatly affect plant performance, and it's something many of us don't think too much about. We have to consider structures like overhead power lines or buried cables or existing trees, or planting, consider those structures before we plant trees whose canopies might interfere with them or whose roots might interfere with buried structures. We have to consider the mature height and width of plants when we select them. And we have to remember that tree's roots are going to extend well beyond, or at least to and well beyond, the breadth of the canopy. We might want windbreaks. They can provide protection from the cold and help protect some of our more tropical plants in the wintertime. And in the summertime, they can help reduce water loss in plants if they're planted to break the wind from the prevailing summer wind directions. And we should try to take advantage of slope and drainage. The thing with water is we really want to keep as much of it on our property, on our landscapes as we can, so that it can penetrate deep into our soil and benefit our landscape plantings and not run off our property. So these are important things we have to consider when we're planning. And then we have to think about what we're trying to achieve. What are our goals? Do we want more privacy? Do we want to open up views to some beautiful spot that we can see from our homes? Do we want a children's play area or a work or a service area? Do we want outdoor space? Do we want areas visible to the public? So this is all about thinking about who's going to be using the space, what kind of activities do they enjoy, and what are your desires? And then you might end up with a little diagram like this. Here's a house, and the creator of this diagram has decided they want an attractive entrance, they want a partial enclosure for semi-privacy, they want a recreation area in back, maybe a swimming pool in the future, a children's play area, a work and service area, maybe with trash cans and vegetable gardens and storage and potting areas. So, you're seeing things put on paper, and that's the recommendation, that when you start planning, you really make notes and put things on paper so that you have something to work with. And here's another, the source of this information is coming from the Earthkind website, Planning the Home Landscape. So, and then you have to clarify your design intentions. What kind of garden are you looking for? Do you want to have a formal look or an informal look? Do you want to grow vegetables, herbs, plant fruit trees? Maybe you want to have a wildscape with native plants for butterflies and birds. Maybe you want a water garden. You got to figure all that stuff out, of course. And then, as I said, put it on paper. It's recommended that you make a sketch of your property to scale that includes your house, your easements, your walks, drives, and fences, existing planting beds and trees and shrubs, and your grass. And this next slide kind of shows you what that could look like. Here on the left, and you might have this plot plan in when you buy a house, often you're given a plot plan that you can work with to create this rather than to have to go outside and make your own measurements. But here's one that shows all the important elements. Starting in back, here's the sewer line. Here's an existing tree. Here's the telephone pole and the electrical line. Here's a water line, a gas line. They've even noted the height and the width of windows. Usually when you landscape, you don't want to block the views from your windows. So you sketch, what's there, and then you make a final plot plan that keeps the essentials without the words. So here's the water line, here's the gas line, here's the electric line, here's the sewer line, the tree. And now what you can do is start designing your dream landscape. You take this big piece of paper with this drawing on it, and you use tracing paper, and you start playing. You can reshape or add or remove your planting beds. You can play around with trees. You can figure out how much turf grass you need. You can add patios, etc. And in the process, you can consider ways to make your landscape more earth kind. Earth kind landscaping says we should design for longevity and efficient management. Hopefully this effort that you undertake, and by the way, you don't have to be starting from scratch to do this. You could be planning a renovation of what you already have, and you've probably already figured that out. But hopefully whatever you're about to undertake will last for years to come, and it'll be easily manageable. Every site is unique. Landscape design doesn't have any fixed rules, but good designs incorporate several principles. Earth-kind landscaping says your objectives should be for low maintenance, energy conservation, water conservation, and your lifestyle. And I want to take this opportunity to say, let's not overlook the soil. Once your plan is complete and you're ready to install new landscape features, don't overlook the soil because it's the foundation on which you're going to build. There are 3 easy steps to improve your soil, which you see on the slide here. Incorporating 3 inches of fully finished compost into your soil. We're mostly on clay soils, so we raise our beds up a little bit as we add that compost. And then after we've planted, we use 2 to 3 inches of organic mulch. Soil improvement means making the soil favorable for plants to grow. And some of the conditions that exist on our properties at our homes that can inhibit plant growth include things like compaction. If you've just moved into a new house recently, chances are the soil in your yard is highly compacted due to the building equipment that's been, used there to build the house. Plants need a good soil structure where they can grow roots, and compacted soil doesn't do anything for that. If we have poor drainage, plant growth can be inhibited. Having raised beds amended with compost improves drainage. Having low fertility in our soil can inhibit plant growth. Compost increases soil fertility. And having thin topsoil can inhibit our plant growth. So don't overlook the soil. And here are some of the benefits of using compost, many of which I've already mentioned. But it's a wonderful slow release fertilizer. Over time, it releases its nutrients in the soil. It makes clay soils drain better. If you happen to be on sandy soil, it's going to hold water longer than it would without it, so you won't have to water as often. It enhances the number and diversity of soil microbe populations. We don't often think about this maybe, but good soil is alive with life. Soil microbes and all kinds of insects. The first thing that comes to mind perhaps for you might be earthworms, but pill bugs and fungi and bacteria. There's a whole soil ecosystem that in healthy soil, in those real world places I talked about earlier, those microbes are in the soil doing their work. And as they consume organic matter, they release the nutrients in the organic matter back into the soil, and it enables a plant's roots. They enable a plant's roots to take up nutrients and to thrive. And compost helps increase that soil microbe diversity. And compost makes the soil structure good, and so that plants can expand their root systems. The other thing you'll want to do is use an organic mulch. This helps with water conservation. It'll limit evaporation loss from the soil by as much as 25 to 30%. It keeps our soils cooler in the heat of the summer. It keeps weeds from germinating as quickly. It helps with erosion and runoff. It will break down too. It will compost in place, and it will, over time, improve the soil structure. And in the process, it adds its nutrients back to the soil. And it keeps organisms that might splash up from the soil onto a plant's leaf and cause some foliar disease. It slows down that process. Organic mulch is really high impact and low tech. So it's something we should all be using and keeping in place in our planting beds. More about soil fertility. I mentioned earlier having your soil tested. At this website, soiltesting.tamu.edu, you'll find everything you need to know about a soil test. If you needed a supplement, you wouldn't go to the pharmacy and buy one of everything and start taking it all, hoping that you would supplement whatever you're lacking in your body. Well, think of your soil the same way. We go out and buy a sack of balanced fertilizer, and we don't know if we need everything that's in that sack of fertilizer. But if we have our soil tested periodically, we can buy what we need and avoid the pollution problems that we sometimes create. It's a small cost. It has big benefits. And I'll show you a sample of what one looks like. This is what you get back. This was a master gardener friend of mine. When you send in a soil sample, you say, okay, this came out of my backyard and I'm in a vegetable garden. And he sent in a small sample of the soil collected in a prescribed way and just mailed in. And when he gets it back, he finds out the pH of that soil, moderately alkaline. And look at all of this list are the nutrients that they're measuring for in that soil sample. And there's a line here It says CL, that stands for critical level. In other words, if the soil sample says phosphorus is above the critical level, potassium is above the critical level, you don't need a fertilizer. We don't need to be adding more of that in to our lawn or into our garden beds. What this soil sample told my master gardener friend was that his garden was lacking nitrogen. And then he gets a fertilizer recommendation to fertilize using 1.3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. I mean, how cool is that? You go to the store and you buy what you need, and you don't apply more than you need. He also asked for a measure of how much organic matter was in his soil, and he got this result, which was a little over 5%, which is not too bad. So that's my pitch for soil sampling. If you haven't done it, it's easy. If you have a family, you can engage your kids in this, and they'll learn in the process. So enough about the soil. Another planning consideration is plant spacing with growth in mind. We buy these little bitty pots at the nursery, and we want an instant result in a planting bed that looks like it's finished. Well, we have to refrain from that practice. We have to look at those tags that we get with plants or do other research online and find out how wide it's going to get and how high it's going to get, and then space our plants so that when they're mature, after a growing season or two perhaps, their ends are just barely touching. There's little space between them. Because when we overcrowd, we can hamper their growth, we can get more insect and disease problems, and we can hurt our irrigation efforts. When plants are planted too close together, sometimes the lower limbs will die back and leaves, and it gives you this leggy plant. Sometimes plants like roses are prone to fungal diseases like black spot, and that more likely occurs in overcrowded conditions because air movement is hindered and the leaves stay wet for too long. And then sometimes you can have more insect problems because they can hide in that forest, so to speak, of plant material that we've planted too close together and be sheltered from the wind, rain, and their natural enemies, and they can be a healthier population than we'd like them to be. So plant placement involves spacing, but then it also involves other factors. Not every spot in our landscape has the same conditions. The term is microclimate. We have different microclimates around our home. Some sides of the house might be cooler, hotter, more humid, shadier, sunnier, more exposed or protected from the wind. And all that's going to affect that particular spot's suitability for different types of plants. So a good design takes advantage and uses plants where they're most suited. So on the north side of your house, you're going to use plants that prefer shade and that just tolerate less heat. On the east side, you're going to use plants that prefer part shade because they benefit from a reprieve from the afternoon sun. On the west or southwest side, you're going to put those heat-loving, drought-resistant plants because that's going to dry out the quickest in the heat of the summer. And on the south side, you're going to put those tropical or subtropical, more tender plants. That might be things like hibiscus or even fruit trees that need protection in the winter. That might not be all the protection they need, but they'll be, the sun moves to the southern part of our sky in the wintertime. So the south side of our houses are more sunny and warm in the winter than they are in the summer. So think about your microclimates. And then think about plant diversity. If only one or two types of plants are used in a planting area, you might get a result that seems a little bit boring and it might end up being a little bit vulnerable. If you had a deadly disease come in, it could wipe out your entire bed. And also, pests and disease-causing organisms tend to move more freely in a larger planting of a single species. So the general advice is have plant diversity in your plantings. And that way, if we don't have as many pests, we won't be reaching for those pesticides. And plant placement. In other words, planting a bed. It's important to think about water needs for the plants we select, at least if you're serious about water conservation, because all plants are not equal in terms of how much water they need or even want. There's three ways to think about it. There's something that's called the regular watering zone. These are plants that benefit from weekly watering, either from rainfall or our having to supplement it. That's going to be things like our lawn, our tender annuals and perennials, and our fruit and vegetable gardens. On the other end of the spectrum, there are plants that need little or no supplemental irrigation. That would be native and other drought-tolerant plants. And then in between those two extremes, there are plants that could benefit from an occasional watering once or twice a month. And that's most of our herbaceous perennials and ornamental grasses. So the point here is that when you're planting a bed, if you'll try to stick with plants that have similar watering needs, you will be able to manage your irrigation system in a way that is conserving water and beneficial to the plants that you're planting. This is called hydrozoning. If you have an automated irrigation system and you have zones for different of your planting areas, you can schedule your watering based on the plant's needs and not overwater or wastewater. And it's recommended that we use drip irrigation. This is one of the most effective means of achieving significant water savings. Drip irrigation has an efficiency of at least 90% compared to traditional spray or sprinkler irrigation, which is often only 50 to 70% efficient. A lot of that spray or sprinkler irrigation is lost to evaporation, or it just gets blown on a windy day to a place where you're not intending it to be. So drip irrigation applies water slowly at the root zone, and it puts the water right where the plant needs it, and you don't have to use as much water to get the same effect. You know, in new landscapes, turf grass serves more as a filler than it does a design element. Take the picture in the bottom right corner of this slide. Everything between the house and the concrete on the sidewalks and the driveways and the fences, it's just filled with lawn. It's not very appealing from a design perspective. Instead, though, we could consider the lawn as part of the design element, more like what you see on that left-hand side. It's very attractive, it's got curves, it's surrounded by planting beds, and it looks like it's part of the overall design, which it is. And a good rule of thumb is to use equal parts turf grass, planting beds with native and well-adapted plants, and hardscapes. That would be your decks, patios, etc. That's the landscape rule of thumb. This turf grass issue and water conservation is important because turf grass is the largest irrigated crop in the country, and it tends to be the heaviest use of irrigation water in our landscapes. Most of our lawns receive too much water, which can even cause disease problems. You know, I sometimes think about this example. When I'm thirsty, I go to the kitchen with my glass and prepare a glass of water, and I drink it till I'm satisfied. My thirst is quenched. But where my lawn and my plants are concerned, I might think they need water, but I don't really know. So, what do we do sometimes? We just say, okay, I'll put the sprinkler out and I'll run it for an hour. Is that enough? Too little? Too much? Hard to know. But the researchers tell us that most of us are overwatering most of our plant material. Okay, one of the ways to mitigate how much tap water we use on our gardens is to try to find a way to keep the water that falls, the rainwater that falls, on our landscapes. There are ways to do that with rainwater collection, which I'm not going to go into today, but having a garden called a rain garden accomplishes the same thing. What's a rain garden? Well, it's a space that you either have, you already have a low spot, or you create a slight low spot where water is diverted from your downspouts into this garden area where it can accumulate and be soaked up instead of entering the storm drains. So it's a good thing. It's slowing down runoff, and it's purifying, it's recharging, I should say, groundwater systems. And so here's a picture of a rain garden. This is a rain garden. It's very attractive. You have to be careful about what plants you put in it. And you need plants that will tolerate being almost in standing water for a day or so and then drying out until it rains again. But it's possible, and it could be an interesting way to prevent runoff from your property. This website, watersmart.tamu.edu, has all the advice you need about creating a rain garden, and it's even got the plant list that you would need to know how to plant it. And then designing for energy conservation. Large trees that shade the roof and walls and windows of a house from the afternoon sun can reduce the temperatures in the home by as much as 8 to 10 degrees. That's pretty significant. And of course, deciduous trees drop their leaves in the wintertime. So they shade our homes in the summer, but in the winter, the sun's rays can penetrate the canopy of that tree, the leafless canopy of the tree, and warm our roofs and walls. So paying attention to this in our landscape design helps to change the microclimate around our home. And there's advice that you can find about how to do this. And I think, well, let me give you the advice first. You see it on the slide. If you're going to shade the roof or the wall of a one-story home, the recommendation is that you pick a tree that's going to get 35, 50 feet tall and place it, I don't know, 15 to 20 feet from the side of your house. Well, to me, that seems like it could be a bit of a challenge in a typical suburban neighborhood where a lot size might only be about 60 by 120 feet. And you've even got your neighbors to consider, or maybe you inherited trees, that are already in place. So if that's your situation, don't despair. You can use smaller trees and plant them a little bit closer and achieve some shade on the walls and the windows and the doorways of your house and accomplish similar results. There's this cool website that I'm showing you here, texastreeplanting.tamu.edu. It's a searchable, I'll call it a database, but it's interactive. You tell the website where you are, where you want to plant trees, and it gives you choices that you can make among the different trees that would do well in your area. And it shows you information about their height and breadth and shape. It's a great way to select a new tree for the landscape. All right. And if trees are not, if you have all the trees you need or don't want to go the tree direction for energy conservation, you can consider these options. Vines on trellises and espaliered plants can shade windows and walls. And vines on landscape arbors and other overhead structures can provide shade for living areas. You know this, it's not sort of rocket science, but it's a good way to achieve energy conservation. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the second section, the second of three sections. This one's been about planning. Are there any questions that I can answer about what I've covered so far before we talk about the design elements?
Yes, Peggy, we have one that asked, have you noticed low, soft, or spongy spots in your soil under your huge live oak tree over the years?
I have not.
She says that trees use up soil for nutrients, and with our consecutive droughts, the trees are thirstier, causing dips in the soil under it. Just wondering if it is a common occurrence. I have tried to remedy this with leaf buildup, again, like nature does.
I have not experienced that personally. At the end of this presentation, I'll have a slide that reminds all of you that the Master Gardeners staff a help desk. And if I would encourage you, you'll see the information later. I would encourage you to maybe pose that question to them, send some pictures if you want to. I would be guessing at the answer to that question, not knowing for sure your situation. So it sounds like you're seeing some subsidence. Your soil is sinking. Your roots are getting bigger, so they're protruding above your soil line. The width of a root, those big roots that support a tree, just like the trunk grows outward, those roots grow outward, so they suddenly appear above your soil line. It doesn't necessarily mean your soil is shrinking, it means your roots growing. But I haven't found soggy spots or anything like you've described. So please ask our help desk, and we want you to have the answer.
And we'll post that link for the help desk.
Thank you.
Another question, what are some plant suggestions for east-facing raised beds under live oak trees mandated by HOA that can create year-round interest?
Oh, give me a hard question. Oh, that's a good one.
And it's partial, dappled, direct sun all in one, just to make it a little harder.
Yeah, this is great. It's a perfect lead into the next session. I'm going to give you some tools, some plant selection tools in just a minute. And I'll probably be pointing you in the direction of some good information. The oft repeated recommendations that I hear about planting under oak trees when your grass stops growing is to use a ground cover of some sort. I don't have any personal experience with that. I just have ground that no grass is growing on. But we have a way to help you get some. Texas A&M Aggie Horticulture has a way to get you some answers, some suggestions for those kinds of problems. So, yeah, that HOA part can be a challenge for you, I know. So hold that thought. Let's see if I point you in the right direction in the next couple of slides. And if when I'm finished, you're still curious, again, you can use our help desk and see what they have to say. You're going to find a lot of information about plant selection on Aggie Horticulture's website, as I'm about to show you. So I hope I get you to the right places.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, do you have another question?
I was just saying we've posted the hotline in the chat.
That's great.
And
great.
That's all the questions we have at this point.
Good. You know, I prefer not to guess at some answers to your questions. I don't mean to be evading them, but if I haven't had personal experience with something or don't feel really well versed, I'm going to refrain from trying to give you an answer, and I'm going to help you find the answer. So that's what that's all about. So let's talk about plant selection and visual impact. So at this point on this journey you're on with me today, you've set your goals, you've considered the environmental aspects of landscape design, and now it's time to start making some smart plant selections and achieve that visual impact we all desire. So when choosing plants for the landscape, we have to consider their functions, their preferences for temperature, light, soil, water, in addition to their appearance. And native and well-adapted plants require fewer inputs like water and fertilizer, and they're more tolerant of pests and soil conditions. And once established, native and well-adapted plants and trees and shrubs require little or no supplemental water in regions with average annual rainfall of at least 30 inches. And that's us, folks. We ought to get enough rainfall to keep our gardens alive without our having to use tap water to do that. So I'm going to show you, this is the Aggie Horticulture website. It's a screenshot. This is what you're going to see when you go there. And it's chock full of information you can use. For example, if you're growing fruits or nuts, you've got fact sheets here. If you're growing vegetables, you've got fact sheets. Here's Earthkind Landscaping. I'm skipping around. Here's Texas Superstars, which are great plants. And so I'm going to take you next to the Earthkind Landscaping place. So the next, if you clicked on Earthkind Landscaping at that last page, you'd end up here. And I'm going to show you the Earthkind Plant Selector. This is where I hope the last question that I sort of dodged could be answered to your satisfaction, viewer. So if I go to the Earthkind Plant Selector, I'll end up here. This is where I would either put in my zip code or select my region from this map, like we're in region G. Okay, what's here? This is a database of many, many plants. Not every plant in the world will be here, but many plants are in this database. And they are evaluated based on their suitability for a growing region. So if I were doing this live, I would choose region G, and then I'd end up here. It says search for plants in region G, which is Southeast Texas. I can go in here and search for a plant by its common name, or notice that growth habit. That's a drop-down box. I could be looking for a ground cover, thinking about my oak tree. Notice the exposure. Do I want to grow in sun, part sun, or shade? Do I want a blooming plant? When do I want it to bloom? What kind of leaf character am I looking for? So I could do a customized search based on those kinds of criteria, or I could generate what's called a quick list. That's what that bottom red arrow is pointing to. That's going to give me a list of the highly recommended plants for my region. Practically every plant in this database is rated based on its heat tolerance, its drought tolerance, its pest tolerance, its soil requirements, and its fertility requirements by region. And then each plant, after it's assigned a value from 1 to 10. And the closer that value is to 10, the more research source efficient the plant is. So plants with a value of 8 or higher are considered to be extremely resource efficient, which means they need minimal amounts of soil or fertility amendments. They can generally tolerate our heat, drought, and pests in our region. So if I were on this page live, I'd generate a quick list. And then I'd get pages that look like this with pictures of plants, their scientific name, their common name, and their earth kind index. That's the rating system I was just telling you about. So I can scroll through these pages until I see something I want to look more closely at. And let's say I've done that and I pick one of my favorite native plants called Turk's Cap. And when I click on Turk's Cap's picture, I'm taken to this page of information. So I'm just going to walk through it with you a minute. It tells me that this is an outstanding native Texas herbaceous perennial. It's going to tell me the good and the bad. It says it spreads from root suckers and seeds. It's dark green lobed red maple-like leaves. It's got 1-inch long upright red flowers. It's adaptable to sun or shade. It's best in partial shade. It's excellent in naturalized landscapes. That's what I love. And shaded understories. It can be a tall ground cover. And guess what? Hummingbirds love it. And then it tells me, what sun exposure it likes. It describes its flower color. It tells me when it blooms. It blooms from spring through fall. And then when it's finished blooming, it's got this red berry-like seed or fruit that birds like to eat. And depending on where it's growing, it might be 3 feet tall or 8 feet tall. I've never seen one 8 feet tall, by the way. And it might be 2 feet wide to maybe 6 foot. But anyway, I could talk all day about this plant because I grow it. But here's what I want you to know. The Earth Kind Index, it's rated 10. It'll take our heat. I don't have to water it. I don't have to amend my soil for it to be happy. No bugs are going to bug it. And I don't have to fertilize it. I mean, isn't that the perfect plant? And look at all the good that having plants that meet criteria like this can do for the environment and for our pocketbooks, saving us money on all these products we think we need to go out and buy. So that's one source where you might find that solution for under the oak tree that we were talking about. You can also use this, by the way, the Earth Kind Plant Selector, as a diagnostic tool. I've done this. I had some yellow shrimp plant that just wasn't looking as good as I would think it ought to. So I went in and put it in here in the common name, and it took me to the yellow shrimp plant page, which I don't have in this presentation. And I could read about what it needs. And it was just fine on all of these Earth Kind criteria until fertility. It needs a little fertilizer. And I wasn't fertilizing. So I started fertilizing it, and the plant started producing better blooms. So that's how I've used this as a diagnostic tool as well as a plant selection tool. So that's one good way to select plants for your landscape. But there are many more at Aggie Horticulture that I want you to go explore. These are all links to wonderful online tools where you're going to find good information about plants for the landscape. So I hope you use them. And I really hope that when you're searching for information online, you make Aggie Horticulture your first stop. Sometimes when I'm putting a search term in my search for like a Google search, I'll put in what I'm searching for, and then after that word, after the last word in my search criteria, I'll put in the words or the letters TAMU, and that'll take me to any Texas A&M Aggie Horticulture resources. So anyway, I need to move right along here. So the last part of this presentation will be pretty brief. Let's talk about the visual impact issues. This is what we all crave, right? These are the principles of landscape design. And this is what we do to get that visual impact that we want. And I'll illustrate them in the next few slides. It's not necessarily necessary that we incorporate all of these principles, but if we try to achieve a few of them in our plantings, then you'll have that curb appeal or that pleasant visual look that you probably want, like I do, when you look out your windows. So I'm going to go through them real quickly one by one and show you pictures. Here's what an accent means. It's simply a focal point. It could be a garden accessory. It could be plant composition. It could be some use of water or a brightly painted door or some unusual plant. It's an accent piece. There's two kinds of balance. The first one on the left, symmetrical balance, you end up with a very formal look. The two sides of this walkway to the front door are mirror images of each other. The landscape is symmetrical, just like the house is symmetrical. On the picture of the right, you still have balance, but it's asymmetrical. It's a little more complex. It uses different elements to achieve an equilibrium, but I think we'd all agree that that looks very balanced on either side of that staircase. Then you have line. Line imposes structure and guides the viewer through the yard. Straight lines are primarily functional. They lead the eye directly and deliberately to a focal point. And curvilinear planting appeals more natural, though, and evokes smooth, restful, and meandering movement. So do you feel yourself drawn into these two pictures? It's achieved very kind of subtly here with these things coming to a point and then here, whereas these stepping stones, I think, do it for me there. Rhythm and repetition. That just means using the same plants, the same color, the same form, shape, structure, etc., to feel that rhythm in the landscape. It's a good look. And scale and proportion. You have to create a pleasing relationship among three dimensions: breadth, depth, and height. And the plantings on the left are at the John Ferry Garden in Hempstead, and those huge plants work because of the expansive area in which they're planted. They would never work in a suburban backyard very well. On the other hand, on the right is a beautiful example of how a master gardener friend of mine has landscaped her backyard. The scale is right for the space that we're talking about. And simplicity and complexity. In landscape design, it's said that less is more. It's one of the best guidelines, I should say, to follow. Texture. We know texture when we see it, right? It's the contrast between something smooth and something not so smooth, like maybe a rough bark. You can get texture in flowers. You can get texture in leaves. You can get texture in bark. One of the things to remember about texture is you don't have flowers usually year round. So if you're looking for that good texture look in your landscape, focus on the leaves. Try to get, contrasting textures among the plants in terms of their leaf texture. And lastly, color, transition, unity, and harmony. For color, use a variety of plants with lighter or darker foliage and accent with flowering plants and shrubs. For transition, gradually alter elements. And for unity and harmony, use consistency and repetition. Earlier on today, I talked about using site characteristics if you're so lucky to have some property where you can landscape in a way that preserves a site's characteristics. Well, this picture is the one I was wanting to tell you about. It's in a public garden in Prince Rupert on the coast of British Columbia. And it's a hole in the ground. This town excavated this site to construct a public building before World War II. They were just about at that point in the process when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And work on the building stopped. American and Canadian troops were deployed to the area to defend the west coast of Canada and the US from attack. And so this hole in the ground was used as a munitions storage area. And after the war ended, between that time and the end of the war, the public building that they were planning was constructed. It was just moved over and constructed in a different place. So what's happened since then is the city and a garden club have converted this hole in the ground, this former munitions dump, with a lot of, natural outcroppings and things going on there, into this public garden. And it's a multi-leveled public garden that a garden club maintains to this day. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit of information. It's an example of if you buy a piece of property with a hole in the ground, you don't necessarily have to fill it. Okay. In a nutshell, plan before you plant. Right plant, right place, enough space to mature. Grow healthy soil, conserve water, reduce reliance on chemicals, and achieve visual impact and functionality. In the beginning, Suma told you about the classes that are coming up. Take note of those. You'll find them on FBMG's website too. And I want to encourage you to take the Earthkind Challenge. When you're on the Earthkind website, you'll see a link to this. This is kind of fun. Nobody gets the answers to this but you, I don't believe. It's just a survey that takes you through a series of questions about how you're gardening. What practices are you using in your own landscape? And then you're going to get a score ranging from 0 to 100. And the higher you score, the more you're doing to help preserve and protect the environment. And in addition to your score, you get a summary of your questions and your responses. And if there's something that you can do to implement changes, they'll point that at the software will point that out to you. It's a fun thing to do. And I mentioned earlier on that the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners have a help desk. Here's the phone number and the email. You can send us pictures of your problems and we'll help diagnose them and get back to you. You can visit us online, as you may already have done, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And the last slide I have for you today is this one. We want to hear from you. So this QR code will enable you to complete a survey about today's class. So I will take a much needed drink of water and ask if there are any questions I can answer before we conclude this session today.
Yes, we have a few questions. Peggy, back to the Earth Kind plant selector for Region G, where we can see all of the plants and the levels or the number, the 10, 1 through 10.
Mhm.
One question is, does the index indicate animal toxicity?
The index does not, but the description for a given plant may. I'm trying to think of if I've ever seen that. I've seen references to whether or not deer like a particular plant, for example. Toxicity, if you know of a plant that you think is toxic to animals, maybe you're thinking of a dog, then why don't you look it up on that, look it up there and see if you see that mentioned. If it's, I don't know. You can tell I don't know. But it won't be in the numerical index. But let me see if I can. Let's go back here. Here's that slide. Additional comments. I'm looking down here. Oops, where'd I go? So down here at the very bottom of this Turk's Cap one, there's some additional comments. Hardiness zones, fruit characteristics. There is not a heading that suggests that it's going to go there. Probably not what the creators of this website were aiming for. I'm not minimizing the importance of toxicity in plants, but you might have to use other sources to get the answer to your question. I would recommend using sources from universities. Go to websites that end in .edu for your most reliable information.
And Suma added information about this question, but I'll ask you in case you have additional comments. Did you say that the Turk's Cap would grow under an oak tree?
I did. In fact, so many plants spread by seed after they pass through the gut of a bird. It's quite often, if you're in a natural area, if you're walking through a park, you quite often see Turk's Cap coming up under the canopy of trees. And in fact, I'm always looking. I haven't planted any under my big oak trees, which I have quite a few now in the front and the back. But if I ever see one that's come up, I'm going to let it go, because that's the kind of thing you would see in nature. A Turk's Cap growing under the shade of a tree. That's where it belongs, and that would be a naturalized landscape. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another question. The picture that you took, the interesting fact you said about the picture, was it the war zone?
Uh-huh.
What was it called again?
The place that I was at was in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. It's on the coast. The city is Prince Rupert, and it's a garden there. I'm struggling to remember the name of the garden, but I bet you'd find it if you were looking for it online in connection with the city Prince Rupert, Rupert. It's a port city on the coast of British Columbia on the western side of Canada.
Okay, and then our next one is a large topic, but we had I'm sorry, they're asking about the freeze protection. How do you deal with freezes that we seem to be getting around February in the last few years? Protection and selection. And Suma did refer him to the class that we did have that can be reached on the Master Gardener website. But if you had any other comments.
Well, I'll share my personal experiences with you. And I guess the answer, any answer would say, well, that depends on what plant we're talking about. In my landscape, I use as many native and well-adapted plants as I can. Virtually everything I have, except some pass-along plants from my dad over 100 years ago, are that type. And while they may get frost damage in the wintertime, I rarely ever lose anything in terms of, by that I mean it never comes back. I lose the top, but the roots are still alive and they, re-sprout in the spring. So if here's the thing, what's a native plant? A native plant is a plant that evolved in a particular part of the world and has evolved over millions of years, let's say, in that place with those temperature extremes, with those insects, and it's perfectly happy. It can take it. It might not look very pretty after a February freeze, but it won't be lost forever. When we talk about a well-adapted plant is one that perhaps was native to another part of the world with similar climate that we have, that the nursery trade has brought here and we're using it here. It's not native to here, but it's well adapted to our climate. You get the similar results. When we start growing tropical plants, that's where we have some trouble. They're from the tropics. They don't get freezes in the tropics. So those are the plants that need more protection. I hope that got to the question. I've already kind of lost. Would you repeat the question again for me, Rochelle? Because I got carried away there.
Yes, no, it was basically with freezes that we've been getting, what are some ideas for protection versus selection, which I think you answered.
So if you do the right selection, you don't have to worry about protection, is one way to think about it. If you choose plants that are not cold hardy, then you've got a protection issue to deal with, whether you're covering or adding lights or whatever. You can find plant cold hardiness information, on reputable websites, and you'll look up a plant and you'll say it's hardy down to 20 degrees or something like that. Yeah,
correct. And I think sometimes with plant selection, you really do have to look at the hardiness zone, because some things are considered annuals here, because once it does freeze, you will lose them.
that's right.
So, okay, I think, hold on, let me see if we have more. Somebody asked, what about the live oak trees? I am losing one of my big oak trees after the freeze.
Is there any more information in that question?
That's what they said. GTBRE, if you would like to unmute and ask Peggy.
While we're waiting to see if that happens, this is another great example of that person. If you'll take a picture of your oak tree, several pictures, and send it to our help desk, they'll help you diagnose what's happening. Did they say it's a live oak or just an oak tree?
Live oak, yes.
And I wonder how they know they're losing it. Live oaks right now are dropping their leaves. They're changing them out. It's that season where last year's leaves are falling off even as they're putting on their new leaves. It'll look like they're evergreen, but they're changing out their leaves. But that's not a bad sign. That's just a naturally occurring thing. But if they've got branches that are not leafing out, we need to see what the problem is in order to help diagnose it. And our help desk can certainly do that.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of the class, and I am posting the survey link if anybody can fill that out. And thank you so much, Peggy, for your presentation. I always love hearing your presentations. I watch them over and over again.
Well, thank
Get
you.
more and more information. I love them. Thank you to all of our team members on the Landscape Success Program and for helping with this class today. Again, if anybody has any questions, you can call the Fort Bend the Fort Bend Master Gardeners Help Desk, send pictures, and they can help you. And also, if you will fill out our survey, and you can also register for the rest of the classes in our landscape series, which you will love all of the classes, all of the speakers. In my opinion, the landscape success presentations it's the bread and butter of what you want to learn for your home landscape garden. And referring to them over and over again, you'll constantly get new information. So that is the end of our presentation. You will get a recorded, the link to the recording if you've registered for the class after the survey, which will take about a week. That was another question. Okay, Peggy, very quickly back to the gentleman or the person who asked, they couldn't unmute. Branches not leafing out of the live oak tree question. Branches are not leafing out and it suddenly has bark falling off.
That's a bad sign.
Okay.
It would be I would be remiss to try to diagnose what's happening there, but please do take pictures and, email or call the help desk and let them help you with that. When bark starts falling off of trees, that can't be good, in my opinion. But I've not known, I would not be able to diagnose it in this sort of Zoom meeting environment. Mm-hmm.
And the help desk will be another great option because you can take pictures to send to them and they will help you.
Right. Yep, they certainly will.
The help desk is fabulous. Another great resource that we offer. Okay, well, thank you again for everybody for attending. Please sign up for our next class. And we look forward to hearing from you on the survey.
It's been fun. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.